Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to the second video in this tutorial on how to build your own computer system. Now, in the last video, I just covered the basics and the overview for the different things that you would need to begin building your system, and then I walked through a demonstration of an online site called Micro Center to show picking out the various computer components that you would need and how they relate to each other so that you can get compatible parts to build your system. So now from here, we're assuming that you have all of those different pieces that you need to actually put together the computer system today. So I'm not a very good graphic designer, so I just put together this stupid little slide here which just shows the basics of what we're going to be doing. So we're going to be taking all of these different pieces and putting them together inside of this case. So in step one, the first thing you want to do is take all of your components and all of your tools and lay them out and take them out of the packaging and whatnot. Now, you don't necessarily need to lay them on the floor or on pieces like this. You do want to keep them from getting damaged or dirty. But in my case, I was actually taking apart an existing computer that I had because I needed to get some of the dust out. And that's kind of a problem I have because I have a couple of cats. So I was blowing out all of the dust that had built up inside of it, and I decided to take it apart and actually put this tutorial together in the process. So I put a little checklist together, and the parts that we're going to be using are listed here. So you have your case, your motherboard, your CPU and the heatsink and the thermal compound, your power supply, cooling fans, your RAM memory modules, your optical drive, your hard drive or hard drives, all of the cables that you're going to need, a video card, which may be optional depending on what motherboard you got, if it has onboard, and of course all of the documentation for each of these. And then for tools, I recommend at least one, but I would recommend 3 Phillips head screwdrivers because some of them have different heads, some of them are a little more pointy, some of them more round, some of them are bigger or smaller, so you should just have a couple at the ready so that you don't have to go and start looking around for it later on. Have 1 flathead screwdriver. This is optional, but if you keep a can of compressed air, if you have one available, you can easily blow off any dust that might accumulate in the process. Hopefully you don't have a lot around. A soft static-free cloth to wipe up or wipe any dust off of things, and zip ties or electrical tape, or if you already have some clips included, which a lot of cases will come with, to keep the wires all tied up neatly and, more importantly, to keep them off of the fan or the set of fans later on. And most importantly, you want to start with a clean and static-free work environment. So you don't want to be building this on top of a carpet, number one, and you want to make sure that you vacuum and just clean up before you actually set everything out. Alright, so you're going to start with the case, and this is the case that I have. So you take it out of the box, you're going to take the sides off of it, obviously. And here you have the front panel, which has all of these wires coming out. This is how it came. And my case came with 1 fan already mounted on the back, so that's depicted right there. And now you want to prepare to attach your motherboard. So we want to take the motherboard, and it should come with some kind of a faceplate that looks similar to this. And if you see, these are going to line up with the various components back here. So you want to take that faceplate, and you can see the dust here. I actually took this picture before I removed the faceplate, but the whole purpose of me doing this was to get rid of all of this dust on the inside and outside. So you want to take that faceplate and mount it to the back of your computer case. And if I can see, that would go right here. So you push that on there, and the next thing you want to do is actually slide your motherboard into those slots so that they fit nicely. And then we're going to mount it down by attaching the screws that should have came with either the motherboard or your case. More than likely they came with the case in a whole bag full of screws and different wires and whatnot. So I'm only circling 3 here. There might be somewhere between 5 and 9, I'm guessing. And as long as you get those screwed in, you don't want to screw them in too tightly because you don't want to risk cracking the motherboard, but you want to make sure that it's nice and snug. Now, some of these cases will come with their own separate tray that's removable from the case. you then mount the motherboard to that, and then mount that entire thing to the case itself. So it depends on exactly how your case was built, but this is the general step that you want to do. And so in the next step, we're going to be attaching the processor. Now, before I go ahead, let me just jump to this site. If you got an Intel Core i series processor and you got a boxed version, it usually comes with its own fan, heatsink, and thermal paste. And you can see here, this is the generic heatsink that comes with it, and it's got the thermal paste already attached to it. So you wouldn't, in that case, need to buy all of these things separately. So at any rate, let's jump back here. Now, to attach the CPU, you're going to want to open the latch lock and flip it open like this. Now, depending on your socket type, it may look a little different, but for mine, I'm using socket type 1155, so it looks like this. And more importantly, you want to note these notches right here. And I'll show you why. If you then take your actual CPU chip, you want to find the notches on it and also this little triangle in the corner. And you should consult your documentation because it's going to tell you, maybe not in words, but at least in pictures, how you should actually go about doing this. So for, again, this is socket type LGA 1155. I'm going to mount it so that this triangle is in the bottom left corner and these two notches line up with the notches on the actual socket itself. And because of the way these are lined up, you actually wouldn't be able to fit this in any other way, I guess, unless you tried to put it in upside down. But so once you line that up, you're going to want to lock down the CPU into the socket. So you're going to close that tray, and you can see this little notch cut out here and this screw. What you want to do is close it, and then you're going to use this lever and press it down, which is going to slide this forward and underneath this screw. So you can see here it's slid under, and I've pushed this underneath this little piece of metal here. So that locks it in place. Now it may give you some resistance, but that's okay. You want this thing to be snug, so you're going to push down pretty hard in some cases. Now in my case, I am replacing the thermal compound. So I have a separate thermal compound here that I'm going to apply. Again, if you bought the boxed version of the processor, you can just skip this step because you already have it attached to the heatsink. You don't want to apply too much thermal compound, so you don't want to double up on it or do anything like that. So in this case, you have two options. You can apply the thermal compound directly to the back of the processor, or you can put it on the back of the heatsink itself. And a lot of people will recommend the heatsink itself because, and if I go back up, you can see this round ring which is formed. This is where the old compound had been. So based on the way that this is, it's not going to cover the entire CPU. It's going to cover most of it. But at any rate, as long as you get this spread nice and evenly, you don't want to get it all over the place on the inside, but you want it to be not too thick, and you want it to cover in a nice even layer. So once we do that, we're going to attach the heatsink itself, and of course this is the generic one that came with it. I just replaced the thermal compound underneath because the old one had worn out. Now if you are putting your own third-party thermal compound on, I should say, you're going to want to allow it to cure for about 24 hours before you actually use it. And freshly applied thermal compound typically needs a break-in period. That doesn't mean that you can't use it. It just means that it's not going to be at the most efficient that it can be. It's not going to cool as well as it can for a certain amount of time before it actually breaks in and spreads evenly. So once you have your heatsink on, and in this case we have little flat notches in here, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's a circular arrow pointing in one direction. You're going to want to use the screwdriver and twist it in that direction until it locks into place. And you can kind of jiggle it afterwards just to make sure that it's not loose at all. So you want this thing to be clamped down pretty tightly against the processor to do what it's supposed to do, which is remove all the heat. So once that's done, now we want to attach the fan, the CPU heatsink fan, to the motherboard. So we're going to find on the motherboard the CPU fan, and sometimes you'll have multiple ones. So in this case, CPU fan 1, we're going to use this 4-pin connector and attach it to that location. So we press that into place. And now the next thing we need to do is connect the case panel, which is the power button, the reset button, and all of the little LEDs on the front. We want to connect that to the motherboard itself. So this way when we hit the power button, it actually turns on the computer. For this, you're going to want to consult the documentation that came with the motherboard itself. So here we have a page section called System Panel Header, and it details this pinout right here. And you can see here it actually has some information about this as well that corresponds. So we have the power LED, positive and negative, and you can see the positive. This represents the top row, this is the bottom. So here's the top row. The positive pin is here, therefore the negative pin is here. So we take our wires, which are labeled, and I think that's listed on the next page. So we have these wires coming out of the front panel, and the ends are labeled like this. So we have the power LED, the hard drive LED, the power switch itself, which is this, and the reset button, which is somewhere down here. And then we also have the USB and the audio. So that's for these two, and the mic in and headphone jack. So we want to take those, and first we're going to attach the power LEDs, positive there, and the ground or negative rather there. Now we want to take the hard drive LED, find where that goes. The positive is the red, so we want to attach that there. Then we want to do the power switch or the power button, and again we see the positive is the left pin here, that's the colored one, so we're going to attach that. And then finally the reset button, and if you notice the reset button, the positive is actually on the right here, so it's offset from the way the other ones are, so you want to put the colored purple on this pin here and then the white to this pin. So finally you have all of these attached. Now we can move on to attaching the audio and the USB. So for the audio, we take that harness and we find the HD audio, which corresponds to those pins. And if you notice, there's a missing pin, and if you look at the other side of this, you can see there's one solid square. So you want to line those up, and it'll only fit in one direction. Press it down and do the same thing with the USB. So there's probably a series of these on the case, and you can pretty much use any ones you want. So just find the USB pin out, and you can see again there's a blank post and there's a blank square on the female piece here. So you're going to push that down into place, and it only fits in one direction again. And now you're ready to attach your power supply unit. So you want to line this up, and in this case it's at the top. In some situations it'll be on the bottom. You want to fit it in so that it actually fits well, and then you want to attach the 4 screws that come with it. And now you need to attach the main power harness and the CPU harness to the motherboard itself. So first we find this 24 pin, or really it's 20 plus 4 pins. This is our, sometimes it's called the main power, the PC main, or the P1 connector. And then you also have either a 4 or an 8 pin ATX CPU power unit, sometimes referred to as the P4. So you find those two. And then on the motherboard, you find there should only be one of these that'll fit. Some of these are rounded, some of them are square, so they're only going to line up in a certain way. But you want to make sure that you get this clip to line up with the clip portion on the motherboard and press that into place. And then the same thing with the P4. We're going to attach it so that the clip lines up with this up here. And in this case, I only have a 4-pin connector. This supports 4 or 8 pins, so I'm going to attach it here on the right side, which is kind of focused in blue there. So you push all those into place, and now you can start to attach your hard drive and your optical drive. So it doesn't matter whether you got a DVD, Blu-ray, all of them are pretty much the same process. You're going to take it, you're going to pop out from the front one of these slots on your case, and slide this from the front into place. And then looking from the side view, you want to line up these screw holes so that this front is flush there, and then you want to fasten the screws down tight to keep this from moving around. And now you need to attach the data transfer cable and the power cable to the back of it. So if we look at the rear view of the optical drive, you'll see here, and in orange I just showed this black kind of L-shaped attachment. The longer one is for the power, and the shorter one is going to be for the data transfer cable. And these are the SATA type. For the older versions, there used to be IDE cables, which were long, flat ribbon cables, but those are kind of phased out at this point. So you want to take your 15-pin SATA power connector. This is attached to your power supply. There should be a couple of them. And you want to find one and attach it to this. And then you should have gotten a series of these either with the drive itself or probably with your case or your motherboard. And you want to attach that. There should be an angled one and a flat one. You want to attach the angled one, although it doesn't really matter, to the back of the optical drive. And then I'll just note that on some of the wires you'll see 6 gigabits a second versus 3 gigabits a second versus 1.5. These are the different specifications for the SATA transfer rates. So we had the original one, SATA 1, which was a 1.5, and then as they upgraded, the more recent ones are usually SATA 3.0, which transfer at a rate of 6 gigabits per second. Now, to the best of my knowledge, you can use these cables backwards compatible, but if you have a 6.0 SATA drive, you're going to want to use a cable rated for that. You don't want to use one of these older cables. At any rate, if you look on the motherboard itself, you'll see a couple of these different ones, and it depends on how many connectors your motherboard came with, but in this case, I have a SATA 3.0, 6 gigabits a second. I have 2 ports. And for the SATA 2, that's the 3.0 gigabits per second, I have 3 ports. So depending on which device you're hooking up, if you have a hard drive that's SATA 3, you're going to want to attach it to this section. If you have something that's only SATA 2 rated, you can attach it right here. So we go ahead and plug these wires into the back of the optical drive, and then in this case, I don't need the 3.0, so I'm going to use the SATA 2 and connect it to these blue ones down here. The next is the hard drive. So if you look at your hard drive on the front, you'll have your model number, and you can actually Google this and usually get all of the specs about it. The documentation should also list some of this information, but from Googling this, I found that this drive is a SATA 2.0, 300, sorry about that, megabytes per second, which falls into the 3 gigabits per second range. And here we have the size of the drive. So again, just like the optical drive on the back, we have this long L-shaped for the power and the short one for the data cable. So you want to slide this in somewhere below the optical drive or above, depends where it fits on your case, and screw that to mount it to the case itself. And now you want to attach the power portion and the data transfer cable and plug that into the motherboard itself. Now this drive was only rated for SATA 2, but in this case I'm actually mounting it to the 3.0 SATA ports. It doesn't really matter. You're just not going to get the full speed that you could if you had a 3.0 capable drive. So now you want to just secure all of your loose wiring, and some cases come with their own clips. I just had some spare zip ties laying around, so you can do that, or you can use electrical tape. Either way, you just want to keep all of the wires kind of neatly bundled together, and more importantly, you want to keep it away from this fan. Otherwise, it'll interfere with it, it can stop it from spinning, and then your CPU overheats, and it can cause some problems. So I'm just going to clip it up here to the side of my case. And finally, we want to attach the fans using the 4-pin power connectors. So this comes from the power supply itself, and this is from the fan, and you should have probably 2 or 3 fans inside your case. So you're going to attach all of these together. Now a lot of these fans will come with this portion, and they'll have another branch that looks just like this, so you can kind of chain them together. This way you're not wasting a whole bunch of power connectors that you might either not have or might need for other devices. And finally, we're going to attach our RAM. So you want to take your memory modules and you want to line up these notches. So you can see this little notch here that breaks up this section from this. And this side's a little longer than this one. So you want to line up your memory chip so that it fits exactly with this. And then you want to put the side edges right into these 2 little slots here. Make sure that the tabs are pushed open. And in the next step, we're going to push these straight down and push evenly on both sides of it. And if you do this right, these clips should snap into place automatically by themselves. So you'll hear a little click, and you can just test that these are locked into place. So you do that for however many modules that you purchased. And now finally we can close up our case because we're pretty much done. So we're going to put the 2 side panels back on. We're going to attach the screws, and I kind of like these because you can just loosen them and tighten them by hand. This way if you need to change things, you can just quickly unscrew them. You don't need to worry about getting out a screwdriver or stripping screws. And then of course you want to attach it to all of the cables for actually setting it up. So generically you're just going to want at least the power cord hooked up, a keyboard, your monitor, and this is optional, but a network cable. And most power supplies have this little toggle switch, so you want to make sure that you put that on, otherwise it won't turn on when you push the power button on the front. And so that does it. And now the next thing you want to do is just make sure that everything worked out alright. So to do that, once you have everything set up, I just did this in a little video, plug everything in, push the power button on, and if we give it a second, right when it boots up, I'm going to hit delete. That brings up the BIOS menu, and through there we can just determine that there's the processor speed. This is how much memory is installed. In this case it's 4 gigs. And if we go over, you can monitor the temperature of the CPU, some of the voltages and things like that. And if we go to the boot devices, we can see that we have this optical drive, that's our DVD drive, and then here this Western Digital WDC is our hard drive, which is attached. So it seems like everything is registered inside of the system itself. So you can just look around here and just get a feel for the various things that your motherboard is capable of controlling with the BIOS, and you'd have to consult your documentation just to check it out. Some of them allow you to tweak settings a little bit for overclocking. Again, I wasn't really going to cover that, so you would have to Google and find things out about it and see what the capabilities of your individual system is. But for the next tutorial, I'm going to show installing various different operating systems and different ways that you can install and set up operating systems on your system. So thanks for watching.